Happy Whiskey Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to the Whiskey Lifestyles Women in Whiskey series. I am your host, Rashawn Hall, aka Bar Time Stories. And this week we have another great guest. We are talking to a CEO. I think this is our first CEO of the series. So, we're talking real executive stuff. So yes, welcome to the show, Pinhook Whiskey CEO, Alice Peterson. Alice, welcome to Women in Whiskey. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's quite a distinction, right?
CEO, that's a big title. I'm a fan of it. I don't have that title anywhere, but one day it's that is aspirational. So, Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to Pinup.
So I did not grow up in this industry, and I definitely had a very special place in my heart for bourbon and rye by way of Kentucky. I had gotten to spend some time in Kentucky with a local. My husband and I were so taken with it that we decided to have our destination wedding back in 2005, not in, Bora Bora or like in a castle in France or something like that, but instead in at a horse farm in Kentucky. We were so excited to share what was so special about it with our friends and family. And so to me, bourbon, very much has this association with like joyful celebration, all of those good things. And so the three founders of Pinhook were two very dear friends and my husband who really were thinking about this as a project, sort of a curiosity. I wonder what it takes to make something that's really worthwhile. One of those friends had opened one of the certainly one of the most illustrious whiskey bars outside of Kentucky at that time. So in the mid 2000s, before everyone thought that bourbon was something to be celebrated. And so he, knew a lot about what was on offer, but not really, didn't know what came before it got in the bottle. So that project sort of turned into this little micro enterprise, and based on the response that they were getting, they decided to make it into a company, but they hadn't really figured out how that company was going to run. And so I was employee number one. I'd been working in healthcare, which is, medicinal, just like whiskey. And I had never, ever thought that, while I loved bourbon, I didn't see it as something that had a role in my professional life. But that idea that it's this sort of joyful, bourbon makes people happy for better, for worse. And there's something really nice about getting to spend your day, furthering that. Right. So I feel incredibly lucky that they, were desperate enough to ask me to help out. And also very lucky that despite, some of my early thoughts, like this is not going to be for me, that it's been one of the very best, probably the best professional experience I've had. So it's now been, I guess this is my sixth year leading this great company, which at first consisted of me and one of the founders, but now is, almost 20 folks.
And you're being, I'm going to say humble to say the least when you say desperate enough, because doing my research, you have a Harvard MBA, so it is very clear that you know how to run a business. So, kudos to you, and I think kudos to them because I think that made sense. So to that end, having a pharmaceutical background, having an MBA, having a business mind, people often say that whiskey is equal parts science and magic. Obviously, having a pharmaceutical background is a little bit of science there, but obviously from a business perspective, it's much fun, as I'm sure when I talk to distillers and as a person who enjoys it, much fun it is to make and drink. To be able to run a profitable business has to be much, maybe not less fun, but equally stressful. Tell us a little bit about kind of the building a business from that financial and like making a distiller. I'm sure there are several people out there who want to do that, but like,
Well,
how did you all do it?
so, I mean, I think a combination of things. The first is, you have to be willing to ask questions. And so, without fail, one of the things that has been so nice about this industry is even though I think of it as being sort of traditional, of there being, a lot of old families and old companies and old brands and, kind of in a way like good old boys who at least stereotypically are part of leading this industry. That being said, people are so welcoming. So I'm a big believer in just asking questions and asking for help. And this industry has really showed up for us. So none of us knew what we were doing really, but people have given advice, people have made introductions, all those kinds of things. Um, the the cool thing, just to get kind of dorky about business for a sec, the cool thing about whiskey and trying to build a business around it is um, that your barrels are your inventory. And unlike inventory in pretty much every other category. So like if you're an electronics manufacturer, every day that your inventory is sitting, it's losing value. It's getting closer to obsolete, right? You're more likely going to have to mark it down. Or think of if you make clothing, like almost everything, food, if you are in the food business, like it's getting closer to spoiling. Whiskey's getting more valuable. So you make an investment in something, you don't yet know for sure, like when you're going to be ready to bottle it because you don't know when it's going to, drink really well, but you also don't know how much demand there's going to be. But every day that you're holding on to it, it's gaining value. And so what that means is that one, if you need to, you can sell it to someone else. So like whiskey is, I mean, it's not a commodity, but coming out of the barrel, it can become many different things in terms of like a style. And a lot of it is how you blend it and how you proof it. So there's a lot more buying and selling of those barrels than one might think. And then the other thing is that you can borrow against it. So pretty early on, we were able to get a bank, Wells Fargo, a reputable bank, to extend credit to us so that we could continue to grow. And that's just kind of a cool feature of this particular industry that doesn't exist in others. So, that was pretty critical. And then we've tried to, a lot of it is about building the right team. And we've tried really hard to have a mix of people who know the industry well or know at least spirits well, and people who are coming at it from a fresh perspective. And I think we continue to say, like, let's ask questions and let's not assume that there is a way to do things. Let's try to understand why people think there's a way and what that way represents. But, we don't have to do things the way that others do. So, we've been really open about, we aren't distillers. We have a wonderful distilling relationship, but it's not our distillery. We have a contract that causes barrels to be distilled, or, we aren't bottling. We have a great partner that bottles for us, and to just focus on, like, our decision's been like, let's focus on the part that makes us unique. And what the part that makes us unique is how we think about blending and proofing our whiskey. And so staying true to that and not getting kind of distracted by like, oh, but shouldn't we have our own facility, or shouldn't we be going to, a ton of trade events, or like, you have to make choices. And so if you kind of put all of your design around a set of choices and stay consistent, I think that you can really do something. And then you're putting something out into the world and you're hoping that other people do the evangelizing for you. So that's the hardest part, right? 'Cause it's not in your control.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing that you note is that, yeah, 5 or 6 years ago, blending and sourcing were taboo. They were quote unquote dirty words. And now everyone's doing it. And it's not just about the juice that comes off the still. It's about to your point, what you do with it. Why that seems like it was a concerted decision you all made. Why did you all make the decision to just focus on that unique POV of focusing on blending person, taking a base level use and then putting your own spin on it?
Well, I mean, in a sense, we kind of have the best of both worlds. So I guess the first thing is, you know, in starting small, and we started with 20 barrels that were purchased from MGP, which at the time no one talked about, but supplies, people think like upwards of, 65%, let's say, of all of the American whiskey that's on the shelf. So, this big industrial distiller, not Kentucky whiskey, Indiana whiskey, which just across the river. And and I mean, we didn't have a choice. We weren't gonna be able to distill 10 barrels, or 20 barrels rather. And I think we realized like that there was so much you could do with how you put them together. And if you have 20 barrels, even if they're exactly the same age and exactly the same mash bill or recipe, that the choices you make about which five go together, not just which five are the best, but really what combination of five are the best was everything. Um, and so I think that, one was it's a lot easier than certainly like trying to put together the capital to distill, but also you know, that's a sensory process, like that succeeding in that way. Whereas distilling, I mean, yes, there's just, sensory at the end of it, but there's so much chemistry. And, I guess we just sort of feel like there are so many people who know that so well and who are so talented. And instead of trying to kind of like replicate their skill and do it too, why not, work with them instead of against them, right? And
Mhm.
why not have we have a wonderful relationship with Castle and Key where we do they distill our barrels for us.
Mhm.
They have this incredible site that's fed by six natural springs, that perfect Kentucky limestone water. They have access to great grains, and they have a world class facility. And so, we're just it's not clear that we could do it better. And so, instead of like the capital and the distraction, I mean, a lot of it is also about distraction, Rashawn. Like
Mhm.
we're a small team, and if we're trying to do too many different activities, just worry that the quality of the ones that matter most will kind of fall. And so it's a little bit of a like cheating, right? Because it's just a great framework for making decisions. You could do so many different things. And what we tend to kind of fall back on is, can we do this? Can we do something special with this part? And if we're not sure we can do something special, um, then whether it's what hat we make or just a decision whether or not to distill ourselves, if we can't make something that's sort of distinctly ours, then we tend to decide to either go with a different plan or to find a partner who does something special.
So speaking to like as you said, Alice, the things that you do and doing them well. The name Pinhook and obviously the design, the association with horses is obviously so special in specific to Kentucky, but also has the bottle shape, et cetera, is very unique from other whiskeys on the market. Tell me a little bit about the marketing origins and the brand origins of the name Pinhook and why you both decided to go in in the direction of, like, the different names being, associated with horses, et cetera.
So, really, it's sort of paying tribute to the parallels between these two exports of Kentucky, or at least the two exports that Kentucky is known for. So, bourbon and horse racing. Pinhooking is a term, I think it was actually used originally for tobacco, but sort of crops where there's an opportunity to buy them well before they're mature. So when they're babies, and therefore do so at a huge discount, and placing a bet. And that bet is that the tobacco, or in this case, the horse, will mature and be a winner, essentially. So when a horse is pinhooked, usually they've just been weaned from their mother. They can barely walk, let alone run. And you're just kind of betting on their pedigree, betting on, your gut about whether they're going to grow up to be big, strong, fast champions. So it kind of seemed like exactly what the founders were doing with whiskey, right? You're buying these barrels. When whiskey goes into the barrels, as most people probably know, it's clear. It's essentially vodka.
Mhm.
depending on, what grain you use, but not a far cry from vodka. And so you're betting that that distillate is going to age in the barrel, exposed to, the season and the variations in temperature and most of all the wood and what the wood does under those conditions, and that it's going to become something really, really beautiful. So what's so, cool is that like that's what that's what we're doing, pinhooking whiskey. We weren't breeding it, we weren't distilling it, but we were picking barrels, holding on to them as they matured, and then, releasing them when they were quote unquote ready to run. So that's the name. One of the founders, we've actually never, I mean, we now have a designer on staff, but in terms of like creating that name and creating the branding and grab a bottle. So like this is our high proof. Oops, I'm turning it the wrong way. Our high proof bourbon. Um, a couple things. Again, sort of at the time, and this was a little bit ago, you would look at the shelf and everything was really short,
Mhm.
dark in color. I mean, it's a dark colored, but like, and the labels sort of were meant to evoke something old and worn, like
Mhm.
sort of leathery, kind of something that would have been around for 100 years, something that your
Mhm.
grandparents would have had on their bar. And so the question was, well, why? And Charles, the founder who is a designer and who's done all of this design, thought, well, maybe there's something in that horse sort of analogy. And so he decided to take the inspiration from the shirts that jockeys wear, which
Mm.
are bright with, big shapes and bold colors. And their whole purpose is so that they stand out. So when you're looking at watching a race, you can see your horse from the other side of the track. And so the whole design of the bottle is meant to do that same thing. So it's tall, so it stands up above the other brands. It's got this bright wax on it. There's a different wax expression. So this is sort of a limited release, but orange is our sort of everyday bourbon. Green is for everyday rye. Um, and then just to sort of further that analogy, the thing that we really do differently, I should say, than other brands is historically a brand has stood for a flavor. So
Mhm.
sort of like, I mean, like most brands, it's a function of most brands is, you order a Coke because you know how Coke tastes and you like how Coke tastes, and that's what you would like. Thank you very much. You don't want a
Mhm.
Pepsi or, vice versa. Um, and so that has been the tradition in American whiskey as well, that, there is a specific flavor. I know someone who drinks a lot of makers, like they know when they're like, it was off. It wasn't quite right. So they're looking for consistency. That's been the goal, which is not easy to achieve because each of these barrels takes on a very different character based on all sorts of factors that all stem from the fact that they're natural ingredients. It's a Wood is natural, the distillate is made from only natural ingredients, the mineral content of the water, the exposure that it has to heat, it varies like,
Mhm.
with two barrels right next to each other. So consistency is hard to achieve. And so one of the questions, and maybe the most important question, that the founders asked was, why is whiskey this super, variable kind of substrate to work with, exactly like wine, like a harvest of
Mhm.
grapes? Yet the goal in putting it together is consistency instead of what's the very best or, quality.
Mhm.
So instead of having a specific flavor profile, we sort of lean into that idea that every set of barrels is going to be different from what's come before, and really start over with each new vintage that we would
Mhm.
make. So instead of just designating those vintages by saying 2022, 2023, it seemed like it was fun to dedicate each one of these vintages to an up-and-coming racehorse that,
Mhm.
just like our whiskey was like just ready for bottling and kind of don't know what's going to happen. As I was saying, you put it out there and hopefully people, really embrace it. And, maybe some years more than others, but that sort of that's our way of guaranteeing to ourselves, as well as the people who drink Pinhook, that we are truly bottling the very best whiskey that we can each and every time.
And as a result of that, I think they're also, like wine, the people being to collect. I know several people who are, really into being able to have, not only the core expression every year, but the high proof that you showed, or some of the more limited expressions. So I think there is a natural marketing upside to that as well. And speaking of kind of collaborations and experiments, I know you guys have recently had the privilege of, I think, first meeting you at the collaboration series 2 launch. Tell us a little about the collaboration series. I think it has a really interesting story and a really interesting kind of pro-social angle, if you will, for what you guys have been doing with those two with that series.
Yeah. Well, so again, I would say a lot of our story has been about collaboration, right? This is not something we've done on our own, whether it's people who have been generous with their expertise, or the partners that we have, who are distilling our barrels, or any, our distributors, our region. So collaboration is something that is like w- pretty central to us and our success. And so, um, the collaboration in the name of this release is really two kinds of collaboration. One is the barrels. So we pinhook barrels from a distillery that we admire, a small number of barrels. And so in this case, it was a distillery called Still Austin, that is, as you might guess, in Austin, and making really incredible. We were excited because they have such a different aging environment than Kentucky, and so it's a relatively young whiskey. It's 4 years old, but it drinks like an 8-year-old whiskey. It's actually truly one of my very favorite things we've ever made. And then the collaboration also exists on the other side. So what we do in this series is we invite someone who is a sensory expert or professional, right? But who isn't working in the world of whiskey. So in this case, um, we uh, we partnered with Garrett Oliver, who is the long established, very much celebrated brewmaster of Brooklyn Brewery. So I mean, he's very, very knowledgeable and about all sorts of dimensions of flavor, texture, etc. But hadn't made a whiskey before. And so our master blender, Sean Josephs and Garrett, sat down together and put together, again, in this case, like the very best whiskey that they could. And what makes it maybe the most special is that Garrett started and has been very passionately dedicated to a foundation called the Michael J. Jackson Foundation, which is meant to, its whole mission is about attracting people of color to this profession of distilling and brewing. And so through this particular collaboration and donating the proceeds to that foundation, we will be able to, I think it's 25 scholarships will be made available to folks who might not have otherwise been able to pursue this, just because there is a real knowledge base that needs to be garnered. And it's one of those things where it's a big world out there, and if people aren't suggesting to you a particular path, and if they aren't facilitating a path, it any given sector tends to kind of keep reinventing itself in the same exact image, as opposed to breaking out in a new direction. So we're really proud of what's in the bottle, and we're really excited about being part of hopefully shaking things up a little bit, and helping new people bring something to this industry.
And to that end, and to the end of collaboration, and like you said, that information loop continues to circle around itself if you don't, and kind of bring in new energy. And it's funny, we've been asking all of our guests this season this question instead of season one, what does it mean to be a woman in whiskey? And that term has varying degrees of opinion. People have varying degrees of opinion on it. But this year, we're asking people what advice they would have given themselves 5 years ago, which I think is particularly interesting, given that like I said, you guys started about 5 or so years ago.
I
So,
hated the water.
yeah, so to that end, what advice would you have
Yeah.
given
I
yourself?
mean, I was saying this to someone beforehand. Like, I feel like I can't really speak because I just sort of arrived, right? Like, I didn't work my way in this industry, whether on sort of the commercial side or on the production side, or I just sort of arrived. And I mean, I was not important or special, but I I didn't have any barriers internally. And sometimes I feel like those are really the barriers, right? Or like for what's going on in your company as opposed to what's going on outside of your company. Um, I think I actually feel like, I mean, maybe I would have reassured myself. I think I figured this out pretty early, but just said, like, this is an opportunity, not an obstacle. Because all things being equal, people are sometimes bored in their job, right? There's a repetitive quality to all this. People, if you're, a distributor, people bring you products. And if you're an account, people, are presenting you things for you to buy. And so, I mean, if nothing else, I feel like it's a benefit that I look different and sound different than the last person who came in the door or the person who's going to come in after me. And I would say that to everyone who doesn't look like the cookie cutter, is that this is an industry that, at least for me in my experience, has been pretty welcoming. I don't live in Kentucky. Um, and that if you just show up and if you are authentic and you are yourself and don't try to fit into some mold that you're not, but that you think is, kind of the accepted way of being, I think this is a pretty wonderful space to work in. So I think just to say, like, don't worry about it. That, like, this isn't going to work in your favor.
And then one of the other things we often wonder is, being in an industry like this, where yes, hospitality and drinking and whiskey are your everyday. What is what is work life balance for you, Alice? What do you do most people obviously go home and have a whiskey. If you're around it all
You
day,
know,
you get
um,
different. What is that work life balance like?
I think that the hardest part is not going home and having a whiskey, which is funny. I mean, I don't, most days in the office, I'm not necessarily drinking, but I think that it's really easy to, I mean, one of the things I love about whiskey is it's so approachable, right? It's like, it doesn't need to be the right temperature. It doesn't need to have a garnish. I do like it on the rocks because I just like everything on the rocks. But and you can pour yourself a large one, a small one. It's the easiest thing, right? And I think because I love it, and I feel like I love it more and more and more and more because you notice things about it more and more and more and more. It's pretty easy to, like, go home, you pour yourself something. Oh my, I've got a glass out. Let me just, oh, you know what? I haven't tasted the rye for a bit. Let me just try that. I mean, this is even just talking about, like, within Pinhook, let alone, oh gosh, I haven't tried Stellum. Like, I haven't tried Barrel's new, I mean, it's endless. And you can pour yourself with just doing nothing, right? You're not like, oh, let me get a buzz on. You're just like
Mhm.
walking into the kitchen. You can be drinking a lot of whiskey. Um, so I think that the to me, like, that's what I'm more that's harder. I mean, the I worry a little bit about, I have 2 daughters. And so, like, one of them is now a freshman in high school, and I was thinking, I gotta, like, her friends are gonna come over and they're gonna go home and tell their parents, like, there's booze all over their counter,
Yeah.
and they're never gonna be allowed to come back.
Mhm.
Um, and So sometimes I struggle a bit with that. I mean, my dad was a professor, and my mother was a social worker. No one was like doing booze for their job. So sometimes I worry a little bit about that. But on the other hand, I think it's fun that they can see what I do. I mean, they see what the product is. Sometimes they're assisting me in sales efforts. Vivian, my older daughter, famously sold a single barrel once by saying, "So, are we going to do this thing or what?"
There you go.
So,
Okay.
and it's if we're somewhere and and I say hello or identify myself with Pinhook, and someone professes their love. I mean, those are my greatest joys. But I think it's kind of cool that they can see. If I worked in like finance, they would never see what I do. They would not
Mm.
really understand what I do because it's so many layers of kind of. But it's nice to be involved in something that's like so accessible in a way, even if you're supposed to be 21.
Well, what I will say is someone who grew up because my father and my family owned a bar growing up. So
Really?
anything that I was aware. It was just for me. Yes, I understand what you're saying about other kids coming over. But for me, it's like I took it. I did not feel the taboo wasn't there because it was always around. So it didn't feel like ooh,
Yeah.
this is a thing I'm not supposed to have because it was there and I had a different respect for it than other kids might have had. So I sh- I hope and I'm sure they'll be fine. But yeah, I think that
They'll
it
fit
is.
into you if not.
Okay. I'm happy to impart what little wisdom I have. So then the last question we like to ask everyone is, just something fun to end on a high note. We always say, if you could have a Pinhook collaboration series to pour with anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I know exactly who it would be. Um, and I think Julia Child. And the reason that I say that is that, I mean, needless to say, she had like a wonderful palate. But I think the thing I worry about with whiskey is that, sort of like wine, I think that sometimes people feel like they have to know something in order to be in the club. They have to, like, people will say like, "How do I taste this?" Or that they think that they need to know what a mash bill is, or that they'll need to know why, how the flavor relates. Like, there are plenty of things to know about whiskey, and you need to know none of them to enjoy it. I don't really like tasting notes at all because I think they just make people feel sad. They like, what's wrong with me that I can't taste the, you know, coriander or whatever it may be. And so I think when I think about Julia Child and I think about, watching her show, I think about like this pure joy that she was not preoccupied with what she was supposed to or how to do it. And she was taking this very like proper medium of French cooking. And she was just like sort of throwing herself into it, sort of being in the present and, making solid efforts and just also being exactly who she was and saying exactly what would come to her mind. And that's what I want whiskey to be, right? Is I want it to be joyful and free and something that people are excited to try. There's so many people who are like, "Oh, I don't drink whiskey. I don't like whiskey." Um, and in addition, my understanding is that Paul Child, her husband, made amazing cocktails. And one I I love a whiskey cocktail, and I'm very happy that we decided to make sure that our everyday bourbon and rye were both priced and proofed to be very much perfect contenders for that. So I'd love to bring a bottle over to the Childs and sip some whiskey with Julia while Paul batched up something delicious for us to drink.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Alice, thank you so much for your time and thank you for Pinhook and making great, you said approachable as well as some of those great limited edition series you do. I am a big fan and appreciate you taking out the time and sharing in the Pinhook story with us. So thank you so much.
I appreciate you. So glad to have gotten to meet you through this adventure. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Really appreciate it.